Thanks to Dr. Kuto-Lekan. First plenary speaker, Professor Claire Kramsch. The director of Goethe Institute Turkey is here with us. Before I invite her on stage, I'd like to thank Goethe Institute and Sabanci University for sponsoring Professor Kramsch. Please welcome Leiterin vom Goethe Institut, Frau Handabe.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear scholars, dear students. Actually, I'm very pleased to see the picture, because when I saw it, I saw all the fish going from left to right, and there's one fish going from right to left. And I think there's one person here I want to introduce. She is a golden fish, I swear it. I'm very, very honored to have the chance to introduce to you a highly respected and very distinguished scientist, a mediator between cultures, and a wonderful, wonderful human being, Claire Kramsch. After studying at the École Normale and completing the agrégation in Germanic studies at the University of Paris, Sorbonne, Professor Kramsch emigrated to the United States, where she taught German language and literature at MIT and applied linguistics at Cornell University. You see, Claire Kramsch, born in France, with a German name, Kramsch, teaching German in the United States. At Berkeley since 1990, she holds an appointment as Professor of German and Foreign Language Acquisition in the German Department and in the School of Education. She is in addition Director of the Berkeley Language Center, a research and development unit for all foreign language teachers on campus. She teaches courses in foreign language pedagogy, discourse analysis, and second language acquisition, and foreign language literacy. Her area of research is applied linguistics, with emphasis on pragmatic, aesthetic, and hermeneutic approaches to language study. She directs PhD dissertations in these areas, both in the School of Education and in the department, in the German department. Her major publications include discourse analysis and second language teaching, Interaction et discours dans la classe de langue, Reden, Mitreden, Dazwischenreden, Managing Conversations in German, Foreign Language Research in Cross-Cultural Perspective, Text and Context, Cross-disciplinary Perspectives on Language Study, Context and Culture in Language Teaching, Language and Culture, and so on, and so on. Many articles she published in all the different, for example, in second language acquisition, the Modern Language Journal, Unterrichtspraxis. Wherever in her field you find publications, you will find her name. And she got a lot of awards. Actually, she got the Goethe Award in Germany, and she got the MLA Distinguished Service Award 2000. And she is honorary. She got the honorary doctorates from the Middlebury School of Languages and the St. Michael's College, 2001. She was the president of the American Association of Applied Linguistics and was co-editor in the journal Applied Linguistics from 98, to 2003. Yeah, Claire Kramsch. I want to add a real personal point. When I met her, it's around about 15 years ago, and we did together 2 workshops, one in Germany, one in France, and there is still one waiting to do, one in the United States. And that was, if you have in your life a very special experience, and you have a very a moment where you know that will lead you to new doors, to new ways. She was the one who did it to me, and I'm so grateful to her, and I'm so honored to have her here in Istanbul. Thank you for coming, and please join me in welcoming Claire Kramsch.
Thank you, Claudia, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for the organizers of this conference. Thank you to the Goethe Institute for sponsoring my coming to Istanbul. I'm thrilled to be back in Istanbul. I was here once. This is my second time. I'm so glad to be here and so glad to be part of this exciting conference where the learner, for once, is taking center stage. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about will build directly on Emra's talk, and thank you for giving us such a wonderful kickoff. I'm going to be low-tech. Namely, we're going to be working with handouts, of which you should have one, because I'm going to be following that handout. But I wanted to exercise less your eyes and your ears than your imagination. And so I want you to be listening to what I say and at the same time dropping the handout and just listen to yourself, imagining how it was to learn a foreign language. The language that you learned once and that you teach today has become old hat. You've become accustomed to it. You use it in everyday life like your mother tongue. It has sometimes gotten numb on the edges. I want to recapture the thrill of learning a foreign language, and for that, I don't need the PowerPoint, I need your imaginations. And that's why we're going to be working just with my voice and with the handout. It has often been said that in order to learn a foreign language, you have to accept being a child again, fumbling for words, not being able to express yourself rationally nor elegantly, making a fool of yourself, etc. What adults tend to forget is that together with a child's physical limitations comes the limitless expanses of a child's imagination and the physical pleasure that comes from playing at being someone else. In a little essay titled Experiences in Language Learning, the Swiss author Peter Bixel writes about learning French and English at school, and he writes, "French, they told me, would be useful. I could earn money with French or would earn less money if I didn't know French. My late acquisition of English had nothing to do with usefulness. It was the realization of a childhood dream. I was learning a language that didn't primarily open up a new world, but rather gave me the possibility of playing a new role, a role play, a promise of transformation, a memory of the age-old dream of human beings to become someone else. In English, I didn't need to be someone. I could play at being someone else." Bixel argues that mothers and language teachers are too fixated on the indicative. "What day is it today?" the child asks. "Wednesday," says the mother. "And what's tomorrow?" "Thursday." By contrast, children favor the subjunctive. "What if today were Thursday?" Adults and native speakers like answers. Children and language learners live in questions and hypothetical scenarios. Living in the subjunctive can be an emotional experience that has only marginally to do with economic benefit and social success. Most researchers and school administrators have considered goals in second language acquisition to be functional objectives, often situated outside the self. Teachers and learners, it is said, have to set their priorities, define their goals in order to attain or realize them and experience success. SLA researchers have tried to predict success by studying learners' motivation, their ability to regulate their own learning, to invest themselves in their use of language. Recently, much research has been devoted to affect and emotion in foreign language learning. I have quoted on your bibliography John Schumann, Pavlenko, and Lantolf, and others, And some have even investigated having fun in the language classroom. I quote Brana and Tyrone, 2001. But these studies are aimed at finding a way to ultimately facilitate the acquisition of the target grammar and vocabulary. Language play and creativity have been studied as one of the important uses of language. And I'm thinking presently of Cook, Sullivan, and Belts also on your bibliography, both online and in face-to-face interactions. See, for instance, Carter and McCarthy, 2004. But they have been considered as separate from the serious business of everyday life, which is exchanging information and negotiating business transactions. With the exception of a few researchers, there has been little exploration of the physical, embodied aspects of learning a foreign language, what it may do to one's sense of self, and what subjective experiences it might evoke. Less fantasy than longing, less memory than nostalgia or dreams of escape, less pleasure than what Julia Kristeva calls desire in language. Desire, says Kristeva, is a drive to consider and discover and experience our condition as speaking subjects, as users of signifiers that don't belong to us, but to the community into which we were born, or to the community of which we are learning the language. We have to appropriate these signifiers for ourselves, but we have to subject ourselves to the community's rules of use for fear of being either misunderstood or rejected as incomprehensible or insane. As one student wrote in the study I will be discussing presently, quote, "Language learning is a constant struggle between an internal speaking voice, which can try out many different approaches in order to say something, and a public voice which is very aware of its inadequacies," end of quote. Desire in language would be then the never-ending striving for self-fulfillment and the sense of plenitude that can be found in the act of acquiring a semiotic system and making it our own. It is the meaning we give to ourselves through the very act of speaking or writing, a sensual act of self-apprehension through the apprehension and enunciation of a foreign symbolic code that we share with others. Now, this kind of description of what goes on in foreign language learning is abundantly described in language learning memoirs that have acquired quite a bit of currency in second language acquisition recently. I'm thinking of people like Elias Canetti, Eva Hoffman, Alice Kaplan, Ariel Dorfman, Luc Santé, Sylvia Malloy, all these people I have listed on your bibliography who have not only the experience but the words to put on the experience of what it means to learn and use a language that is not your own. Very often these memoirs are used as sociolinguistic facts. But of course you have to add the literary, the poetic license that goes with it, and we will be talking a little bit about that. What I have for you today, rather than published memoirs, are statements and testimonies of students that I have collected at UC Berkeley, at my university, among undergraduates learning a second language as part of their undergraduate education. We don't have a language requirement at Berkeley, so these are students who are taking a language on their own volition, very often majoring in the language, but by no means the rule. They are taking a language as part of general education. And this is a study that I conducted and that I have reported on in your bibliography listed under Kramsch 2003, 2004, and 2006. These studies contribute to a growing focus in applied linguistics and on the ecology of language learning that sees the learners not just as individual brains and interactive communicators, but as multilingual sensibilities with memories, dreams, and desires, and as participants in different social scenarios in which they assume various roles and take on various voices or subjects' positions as the opportunities arise. Let me share with you now then, and I want you to look at your handout, the study that I conducted a few years ago at Berkeley among 950 undergraduates studying some 13 or 14 different languages at different levels of proficiency at Berkeley. 60 to 80% of these students already had some knowledge of another language beside English, because the students who come to my university sometimes have had some language at the high school level. For instance, 88% of those studying Portuguese also have some knowledge of Spanish. 82% of those studying Korean already know French or Chinese. The languages that I polled were Arabic, Chinese, Danish, Finnish, French, German, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Norwegian, Portuguese, Spanish, and Swedish, all languages that are taught at my university. The survey was conducted in English and was phrased in the following manner, and I have the trigger question on your handout. How would you describe your experience learning this language? Choose a phrase, an expression, or a metaphor that best captures your experience learning to speak and write in this language. And they could fill out the 3 triggers. Learning a language is like, speaking this language is like, writing in this language is like. The purpose was to find out the students' range of experiences learning a foreign language, the variations in metaphor patterns within individual language groups, and the differences between language groups. The questionnaire was distributed to the instructors who gave it in their classrooms anonymously, and it generated some 1,500 metaphors in response to all 3 questions. As contrasted with the input-output information processing metaphors that still dominate foreign language education and second language acquisition research, this survey amazingly yielded an explosion of metaphors that all attempt to give meaning to a very personal and physical encounter with the language. A resonance of person and things evoked by words themselves, not necessarily by native speaker interlocutors, and the identifications these words elicit with the students. Here I want to analyze specifically samples of metaphors that best represent what I have called desire in language learning. Let us thus consider the first group of metaphors built around 2 clauses representing a change in condition from frustration to pleasure. Learning a language is like putting on a brand new pair of shoes. It's uncomfortable at first, but you break them in. 2, it's like having cement poured into your mouth and EB Mud, which is our utility district company, coming to jackhammer it out. Or it's like a dove held captive since birth and finally let go free. Or it's like learning to ice skate. At first, the process is technical and mechanical, and only after much practice does one attain fluidity and grace. And you can read the others in that cluster yourself. The first 5 metaphors are built around the same double syntactic movement. At first, but then, and then, now, and finally. The last one collapses the 2 clauses into one. If you look at number 8, learning a language is like finding a friend in a crowd. At first you feel lost in the crowd, but then you end up finding a friend. These metaphors all express a joy that comes from relief of pain and anxiety. Note that the joy is not in the state of painlessness itself, but in the relief, in the transition, the relation from one to the other. It's almost as if one can appreciate the achievement only if one appreciates the trajectory in time and the emotional and physical tension that accompanies it. This tension between frustration and pleasure gets resolved now in the metaphor that can hold both in the same embrace by casting a retrospective glance on the past in the light of the present. The next group of metaphors deals with the time of anticipation, projection, and imagination. That is 9 through 14. Learning a language is like eating popcorn. Once you've had one kernel, you reach for another. Metaphors 9 through 13 see language learning as a food addiction, or as an organic growth that has to be fed and kept under control. It is a predictable, logical process like the growth of plants and grass and the appetite for popcorn. Metaphor 14, it's like standing in front of a door and having a huge ring of keys and trying to find the right one, arguably fits into that group because it thematizes anticipation and imagination and the belief that once the door is open, great treasures will be revealed. The metaphors stress the logical continuity from one stage of learning to the other and the anticipated benefits. Pleasure comes here from the ability to imagine the future. And as we will see, imagining the future is full of stereotypes. But that's what keeps you going through the drudgery of declensions and conjugations. The following cluster, by contrast, highlights the frustration at not being able to anticipate events and being caught in a repetitive present. That's 15 through 19. In these metaphors, the frustration and physical pain is expressed in spatial terms through passive verbs expressing physical duress, being transferred, getting hit, having 200 Bics pounded, having something pounded into your head. And in number 19, waking up daily at 9:30 and carrying 200 pounds of bricks back and forth across a bridge. You've got to understand in San Francisco, we've got many bridges, so you have this imagination of walking across the Golden Gate Bridge. A verb of action, carrying, without movement, since the bricks are merely displaced from one end of the bridge to the other and back again. Here, language learning is viewed as an experience of space without movement in any particular direction, and without the sense of sight that would allow the subject to orient him or herself, a kind of frozen time akin to psychological or emotional death. I'm using dramatic terms here because these metaphors are so graphic and experienced with such intensity. The next cluster further compares language learning to the experience of physical space, but in a different way. I'll let you browse through those yourselves. That's from 20 through 30. This group of metaphors expresses language learning as a spatial, physical challenge, avoiding physical dismemberment by barbed wire, defying the laws of gravity, surviving the highs and lows of a roller coaster, conquering strategic terrain against an enemy, overcoming congenital left-handedness, confronting the risks of unpredictable ocean waves. You must remember we are on the California coast here. Reconfiguring your body's natural functions, such as cooking with your feet. Reordering pearls in the bounded space of a jewelry box. That's number 30. These spatial metaphors are suited to capture the grammatical and lexical constraints which language learners have to maneuver in order to find their way around the new language. As you can see, language has a body of its own. We generally speak of language as speaking with other people, native speakers. Here we can see that the learners have a personal relationship to the symbolic system itself. It is something I had not expected before I did this survey. So the vocabulary is often taken from the familiar outdoor activities experienced by adolescents in California, as you can see. So what we see in these first clusters of metaphor is a struggling with the body of the language itself through the body of the learner, through the axes of time and space. The body is struggling with the anticipation of time, or on the contrary, the lack of anticipation of time, and the body experienced in space, as if grammar had a spatiality to it, to which the body of the learner has to adapt. The next set of metaphors focuses on the experience of maneuvering constraints from the perspective not of the obstacles, but the experience of newness and escape. That is a dimension that I had not expected. It is less the lure of the new language than escaping your own language which turned these students on. If you look at 31 through 40, you have some examples of that. And particularly example 40, learning a new language is taking a break from the world I live in. Now, we're dealing with adolescents. They are generally 18 to 22, the undergraduates who have written that. And they are dying to escape the traditional world they live in. Here, the common theme is one of newness, first-time sexual experiences, as you can see. Breaking out, escaping the limits of one's own familiar world, physical space, social role, and identity. They have to do with a new dimension of the body's perception. The mouth in 31 and 32, the brain in 33, the eyes and the ears in 34, 35, social appearance in 36, 37, physical appearance in 38, general bodily feeling in 39, and shedding the body's constraints in number 40. To these self-conscious metaphors, another group of metaphors adds the self-centeredness of the language learning experience and the feeling of self-enhancement that it brings about. You have, for instance, learning Japanese or French in number 43 makes me feel educated, cultured, and urbane all at once. You have these, in fact, these expressions more for Japanese and French. You rarely have them for German, unfortunately. German is more interested in Vorsprung durch Technik and technological prowess than feeling more urbane and educated. As you see, it's replete with stereotypes. And in fact, while number 41, learning a language is like learning how Ford cars work instead of just Chevy, was written by a student of German, number 42 through 45 are representative of the kind of metaphors generated by students of French or Japanese. The desire for renewal and self-enhancement is closely related to the pleasure of dissimulation and the power that comes from seeing without being seen, that we find expressed explicitly in the following set of metaphors, 46 through 49. Interestingly enough, we generally think of learning a language in order to be able to speak to others, to communicate with others. We find in these metaphors the thrill at not being understood, at having a secret language that is exclusive to you. What we find in these metaphors, 46 through 49, is the pleasure called by forming a secret community that draws special privilege and distinction from a use of a foreign code because it excludes others. This special distinction is seen as enabling the members of this community to explore undiscovered terrain and to satisfy learners' natural inquisitiveness, as we can see from the next cluster, 50 through 55. Metaphors 50 through 56 display some of the new themes we have encountered already: challenges, risks, a gambling spirit, and the ability or inability to anticipate events and conquer space. But here the accent is put less on physical endurance and prowess than on curiosity, adventure, and exploration. Strange terrains, new places, caves and unknown passages, winding roads, unforeseen twists in the road, uncharted waters, cliff edges, and secret doors. The vocabulary is taken from the adventure and mystery novels that nourish the imagination of adolescents and young adults. I'm going to skip the next two clusters of metaphors, just only to say that, and draw your attention to number 62, which was especially in response to writing in a foreign language. Writing in a foreign language, of course, writing in Arabic evokes all kinds of beauties and elegance. Writing in Portuguese as part of 62, all the cool tildes and se that make the normally dull vowels look so pretty and alive. Personally, I think that the ow is really sexy, but the I has a kind of aggressive look. My My mom warned me about those type of letters. As you can see, you have a very personal, familial even relationship to the living work of art that these students feel they are doing by writing with the foreign accents and the foreign characters. Let me discuss a few things before we move on to the next study. The metaphors that are used by the students display an inordinately diverse range of perceptions and emotions. The students' choice of descriptors had only minimally to do with the actual teaching methodologies in the class. It was more likely determined by a host of other factors: family heritage, films and TV, prior travel, dreams of escape, romantic aspirations, and perceptions of self. The representations of the language and of the target culture seem to be a strong motivating factor for the immense effort that they have to put into learning the language, even if these are very often of the very stereotypical kind. The choice of metaphors varied according to the medium. While the spoken forms of the language are heavily linked to metaphors showing the desire to identify with native speakers sometimes, like learning Portuguese is like feeling a little bit Brazilian, role-playing physical and emotional experiences and flights of romance or exoticness associated with the foreign sound, writing seems to be the mode in which the term beauty, creativity, elegance, and self-expression recur most frequently. The written medium makes students aware of the double presence of language as a means for the private expression of self and as a mode of public communication exposed to formal and cultural scrutiny. The choice of metaphor varied also according to the level of instruction. In most languages, French, Italian, Hebrew, Japanese, and Spanish, the metaphors used in the first 2 years clustered around the physical duress and the skill-learning aspects of language acquisition, a painful experience. Learning a language is like having a molar extraction, or passing a kidney stone, or pulling my hair out. It is an intimate encounter between learners and their bodies, between the body and its new mode of meaning-making. As one student of Arabic wrote, and I quote, "Learning Arabic is like walking across a desert with the camel. Sometimes you meet other nomads or an oasis here or there, but most of the time it's just you and your camel." However, the students of first-year Arabic in this sample had many metaphors related to beauty and aesthetics. The metaphors used at the advanced levels tended to cluster around changing identity, acquiring a new social and emotional self, traveling through new worlds, engaging in an artistic creative process, and acquiring a secret code. Of course, if they were heritage language learners, meaning learning the language of their families that they had never learned themselves, like, for instance, many Korean students, they would have other ways of expressing what they're going through. Listen to this Korean student say, "Learning Korean is like my grandmother's canary in the window waiting to sing a song I do not recognize, but with time it will be part of the scene." The choice of metaphors was also inspired by what the students knew or imagined about the country, the people, and the culture. Their associations were for the most part taken from traditional, stereotypical cultural discourses. They were not always based on the direct experience of learning the language, but rather on fantasies and dreams that serve as potent incentives for learning the language in the first place. For example, Chinese, Korean, or Japanese kanji characters were typically called pretty, and their simplicity was praised, whereas Arabic script or French sounds were invariably characterized as beautiful, elegant, or distinguished. Such adjectives are less an objective observation on the part of students than a stereotypical judgment of a whole culture. Some students of Arabic showed a predilection for secret doors, keys, and treasures to be discovered, no doubt inspired by fantasy of Arabian Nights. One student of Swedish compared learning Swedish to eating a smorgasbord. One learner of Hebrew compared learning the language to expressing truth from the crevices of words. Learning Japanese was often compared to a battle in which strategies had to be developed. In learning, there is, writes one student, so much to conquer. For another, learning German was a question of mastering the language, of gaining control. Such metaphors, by contrast, are rarely used for French, which seems to inspire students less through the battles of Napoleon than through the splendors of the court at Versailles. Learning French gives many the feeling they are more intelligent, more educated. And I will not go on, you get the gist of the stereotypes that are provided here. But, you might say, aren't all these metaphors rather over the top, as we say, hyperboles? How do we know that these learners really believe what they wrote? Indeed, students are leery of questionnaires. Many, no doubt, took this opportunity to let their imagination free rein, while others honestly tried to express their experience in words, as the questionnaire asked them to do. Also, they might have answered differently had they been asked to answer in a different language than English. English has its own subjective resonances, both for the writers and for the readers of this questionnaire. This survey reveals less an accurate representation of what learning language really is like than a plausible construction of how language learning might feel like. And you might add, where is dialogue, communicative interaction with native and non-native speakers? These students seem to be concentrated just on the language. Isn't the main purpose of learning a language to communicate with those who speak it? Perhaps. But prior to communication and interaction is the experience of language itself. One could say on the naked skin, so to speak. These metaphors reveal a highly subjective apprehension of a world of signs in which the learner becomes totally absorbed. And my next study explores the dimensions of this subjective universe. And I will pass on now to my second, shorter study that I did with freshmen. These are 18-year-olds just entering Berkeley and enrolled in various language classes, but I was not giving language classes. It was a freshman seminar on language and identity. And I asked them, in fact, the trigger is on your handout, I asked them to write a one-page essay on what it means to be multilingual and multicultural. And I told them to choose the genre, the style, the code, or the mix of codes that they preferred. And some wrote in several languages. I said, remember that being multilingual does not necessarily mean that one uses several languages as fluently as do monolingual speakers of each language. There are various degrees of multilingualism, as there are various degrees of identification with multiple cultures. So here you have 50 or 60, a corpus of 50 or 60 essays written in different genres, of which I have chosen 3 that are pretty characteristic of different groups of students and how they write about their experience of being bi, tri, or quadrilingual. The first one that I have here is an Anglo-American 18-year-old who studied Spanish and was currently enrolled in a German class. And she describes here, and I will just shortly read this to you to give you a sense of how she describes her experience learning German after having learned Spanish. The teacher tells us to open our books. I rushed to the page, and at the disdain of my classmates, I raised my hand. Yes, Natalie, says the teacher, you may read. She says that not in Spanish. So I read. The words roll off my tongue with increasing confidence and speed. I don't even know what I'm saying, but I concentrate on making it perfect. As you can see, it's the sound that she gets involved in, not so much in what the words refer to. After finishing the paragraph, I become instantly jealous as the native speaker reads the next paragraph, because in the Spanish classes you have a lot of people who have Spanish in their family. What's the difference between her and me? Why does she look at me with such disgust? Why aren't I worthy of the language the same way she is? Okay, I will skip what she goes into the Spanish class again. She longs to hear her own voice again. Now listen to this. I long to hear my own voice again. Again, this focus on the body of the learner and how the body is transformed by those new sounds that she has to produce. It's not the meaning that matters. I feel Spanish. I feel new. Then she comes to college and she starts learning German. I watch how she reads. I feel the need for something else. The German class is the only place where I'm allowed to speak, to hear the sounds that I have now become addicted to. These are strong words. I am given this outlet to say things, silly, meaningless things that I would never say in English. I become engulfed in the idea of German. As it happens, this student is a student who plays the clarinet, or plays I think the French horn, and loves music with the same passion that she loves the language, and you can see the relationship between her love of music and the love of the language. And she ends this quote by saying, in class I can play so passionately I can cry, enveloped by the sounds of oneness. And a little further above she says, music liberates me from my silence. We have the feeling that through the foreign language, she's able to say things or to have an aspect of herself that she couldn't do in her own language. Let me comment a little on this. Natalie's various language learning experiences form a rich blend of linguistic, emotional, and aesthetic experiences. For her, meaning is not primarily in the objective reference, but in the subjective experience of words. Perfection is not necessarily approximation to the L2 rules of phonology, but it has to do with the fit between her body as a mediating instrument and the forms, the sounds that it produces. The pleasure Natalie describes does not come from having brought her message across, but being in subjective harmony with herself, one with her words. Hearing herself speak in German enables Natalie to monitor her speech in ways that have become blunted in her native English. It liberates her, as she says of music, from the silence of herself, validates her existence. Given this overwhelming pleasure of a united self, she expects her feeling of self-worth to come from the embodied experience itself, and she feels disappointed that it doesn't measure up to a social native speaker norm. Let's pass to the second example. The second example is a Korean-American student whose parents live in Korea, and very often, like parents do in Korea, they send their children to have a good higher education in the US. So this student was here alone at Berkeley with her parents in Korea. She herself doesn't know Korean because she was raised by an English-speaking nanny. She can't speak with her parents because they don't speak English. They speak Korean. She doesn't speak Korean. There she is at Berkeley, and she wants to escape from this English that has been imposed on her. She could, of course, take Korean classes in order to be able to speak with her parents, but Korean has become tainted, has become stigmatized for her emotionally. So what does she do? She takes French. And she puts all her love getting out of herself in French. French has become basically her heritage language by proxy. Okay, so she writes, her essay is in the form of a memo to herself, to her conscious mind. Re-identity. As your subconscious, I feel obligated to warn you that your attempts to break yourself away from half your identity can have harmful effects on both of us. First and foremost, you will not become any more American by becoming less Korean. The latter is impossible because it is an inseparable piece of you. This should be obvious given your physical appearance and your inability to shed certain habits, such as calling your mother only by the Korean word "엄마" when speaking directly to her. Even people whose legs are amputated experience a sort of phantom pain, which seems to originate in the non-absent limb. The most you can do at this period of your life by learning French is merely to add another piece of identity to yourself. It is not a prosthesis or another leg to take the place of your Koreanness. I do think it is wonderful that you have found this new language and culture, but it can only add to the store of treasures you have accumulated in life. It will not make you forget the others. I interviewed this student afterwards, and she conceded that, in fact, she was taking French in order not to take Korean, and that French was absolutely the language of her dreams, of her imaginations. In fact, she had quite an experience with linguistic relativity. She told me that she had fallen in love with Camus after reading L'Étranger in her French classes, and she couldn't believe that although she is from her family and by her personal convictions in favor of the death penalty in the French class, after reading Camus' L'Étranger, she couldn't possibly be for the death penalty because in French it was called la peine de mort. And la peine de mort sounded so awful in French that during the French classes she was, of course, against the death penalty. As soon as she left the French class, she retrieved again her opinion about the American death penalty. So language does that to you, apparently, in those. But I thought that the idea of the phantom pain was something very beautifully expressed in this heritage language learner's experience. My last example comes from a Vietnamese-American learner of English. It was collected by Leanne Hinton, who teaches a course on American cultures, and I have borrowed this example from her, but he was a freshman at Berkeley also, and responded to the same trigger as how would you describe what it means to be bilingual, since he is bilingual Vietnamese-English. And here is what he writes. As for English, I do speak the language, but I don't think I'll ever talk it. English is the language that flows from the mind to the tongue and then to the pages of books. It is like a box of Play-Doh blocks which allows you to make anything. But a Play-Doh house cannot shelter human lives, and a Play-Doh robot cannot feel. I only talk Vietnamese. I talk it with all my senses. Vietnamese does not stop on my tongue, but it flows with the warm, soothing lotus tea down my throat like a river, giving life to the landscape in her path. It rises to my mind along with the vivid images of my grandmother's house and of my grandmother. It enters my ears in the poetry of the Tale of Q, singing in the voice of my northern Vietnamese grandmother. It appears before my eyes in the face of my aunt and cousins as they smile with such palpable joy. And it saturates my every nerves with healing warmth like effect of a piece of sugared ginger in a cold night. And that is how I only talk Vietnamese. This student imbues the Vietnamese language with the nostalgia of childhood and the desire for other possible worlds, beyond the world of achievement and efficiency that he experiences in English. His voice is an English voice with a Vietnamese subject position. These three essays are pretty representative of language learners' depth of experience, even if not everyone has the stylistic talent they have. What they show us is that beyond enabling them to engage in meaningful communication with speakers of other languages, the engagement with the foreign language itself makes them discover other dimensions of experience, other possibilities of feeling, remembering, imagining that are not accessible through their native tongue alone. Let me say something about desire and voice now, since that is the topic of my talk. Both the metaphors and the essays bring to the fore experiences that are not usually talked about in second language acquisition research nor in foreign language education. As Alice Kaplan describes in her language memoir, French Lessons, quote, "The language classroom is bare bones pedagogy, the rawest pedagogical situation I've ever been in, a place where content means almost nothing, and power, desire, provocation, almost everything," end of quote. And indeed, In the study one, the learner's choice of metaphors shows that learning a foreign language makes one more conscious of one's body, emotions, feelings, appearance, memories, fantasies, and of the language's body, its tone, its tastes, its sounds, its shapes, its forms. In the case of adolescent and young language learners and young adult learners, the physicality of the experience adds to an already exacerbated consciousness of their corporal presence in the world. The Vietnamese landscape evoked by the Vietnamese American student of English remains physically and perceptually what Pierre Nora has called un lieu de mémoire, or realm of memory, as does the phantom pain brought about by the loss of a Korean identity for the Korean-American teenager, and Natalie's desire to escape her inner silence through the sounds of German. The learner's metaphors map a concrete source onto the abstract target of maneuvering around grammatical difficulties, navigating treacherous lexical waters, and dealing with the unpredictabilities of human cross-cultural communication. The students express their experiences through familiar genres, tales of quest and conquest, mystery novels, adventure stories, exploration reports, Arabian Nights, and others. They reveal a depth of emotions characteristic of what Durkheim calls serious life, that is, when humans are confronted with the basic parameters of human experience: time, space, and the meaning of life. Time. As we can see from these metaphors, desire, which is the drive to mean, is closely associated with the ability to anticipate, remember, and predict events, namely, to control time. What will happen if I use this grammar rule? How does this rule link up with others? Will I be understood? If I use this word in combination with this other word, will I please or offend my interlocutor? Get what I want? Or will I make myself ridiculous? Also, will I be able to say what I really mean? Who will I be in a foreign tongue? Who will I be taken for? How can I be different while remaining the same? How come I'm having thoughts in the foreign language that I can't even translate in my own language? This is a quote from a student of mine in fourth semester German who said, Frau Kramsch, ich fange an, Gedanken zu haben, die ich nicht auf Englisch haben könnte. I'm starting to have languages at night that I can't translate into English. That's not what I took your course for. Am I all right? I said, you're beginning to see, you're beginning to get there. Is it still me thinking, or is it somebody else? As the language learner experiences time in his body, he also experiences language on its time axis, the syntagmatic axis of semiotic combination. Space. Desire also has to do with the ability to survey a range of stylistic options, that is, to control semiotic space. The excruciating feeling of having only one word for what one wants to say that we've all experienced, of being forced to use it again and again because one knows no other, entails feeling prisoner of the language on its paradigmatic axis of selection. Much of the feeling of blindness, constraint, near-death danger comes from these limitations. In turn, the feelings of freedom, escape, self-enhancement come from having more choice, a broader oversight, a better view of the semiotic landscape. I can now see where the ice is thin, writes a student. See clearly what is below me on the edge of the cliff. Find a friend in a crowd. The ultimate control of semiotic space comes from seeing without being seen, as when passing for a native speaker, or writing in a secret language only to the initiates. This too harks back to the age-old pleasure of the trickster in fairy tales, who is made invisible through a magical ring, or a magic cloak, or a foreign language. Time, space, meaning. If desire is ultimately the quest for meaning, it is voice that will enable learners to objectify this desire and give meaning to their experience. For Bruner, Jerome Bruner, voice is the act of meaning-making itself. Voicing the language learning experience as taking a break from the world I live in, or breaking a hole in the wall, or standing at the edge of a cliff, or voicing the bilingual experience as speaking English but talking Vietnamese, or voicing the absence of the mother tongue as phantom pain, is opening up a seemingly closed, stable world of significations to other possible meanings. It's like the orange fish that you have up there. Or what Shirley Bryce Heath calls future scenarios of possibility. And that is exactly what this fish is looking for, future scenarios of possibility. Such acts of meaning are liminal experiences, to quote Turner and Rampton on your bibliography, not only because they refer to events that happens at the border, at the limes, between one language and the other, between self and other, but because they operate at the border between two incompatible sensibilities, that, for example, of speaking English and talking Vietnamese. It is in these liminal spaces, or during these moments of transition, the desire emerges, and voice makes meaning of the present in light of the past, and of the past in light of an imagined future. As an increasing number of adolescents and young adults find themselves today between several languages, places, and cultures, it is essential that they recapture the sense of self that comes from identifying with an objectified linguistic form of their multilingual selves. Let me conclude. Emotions in language learning is becoming a topic of great interest in second language acquisition, but it focuses mostly on emotion words and the expression of emotions in the L2 lexicon and L2 grammar. What I have been exploring here with you is something more fundamental than affect or emotion in language learning. It is the fundamentally perceptual, embodied nature of language, the physical resonances of sounds, shapes, and rhythms. My informal survey of learners' metaphors and the sample essays on what it means to be multilingual reveals that for learners, learning a foreign language might not be primarily determined by considerations of communicative success and professional profit, even if those outcomes are eventually welcome side effects. For many long years, as the students put it, it's me and my camel, a journey of self-discovery and self-fulfillment that covers the range of human feelings, joys, and frustrations in the search of meaning. Drawing on Julia Kristeva, I have called this search desire in language learning. The learners' voices have focused on the intimate relation between identity, role, and voice in this search of meaning. Taking this desire seriously would mean allowing a non-teachable residue to enter our classrooms, leaving a space for introspection and meditation on the interstices of our packed syllabi and the deadlines of our testing procedures. A space for the unprogrammable, the unpredictable voice. It would also mean restating such seemingly marginal aspects of language as beauty, harmony, style, musicality, and the pleasure of the form in our communicative, content-oriented methodologies. For it is these aspects that ultimately can give the key to the meaning that adolescents and